Oh man, there's only 12 minutes left. I'm not sure I'm gonna finish this in time. So recently I was browsing itch, looking for interesting game jams to join, and one caught my eye in particular. I chose gamedevtv's game jam mostly for its flexibility. First of all, you can participate solo or with a team. Secondly, you can use any asset you find online as long as it's free, which literally saved my ass. And lastly, the jam lasts 10 days, which means that I can procrastinate for 7.5 days and then go into panic mode and finish the game in like 2 days, which is exactly what I did. The jam started on May 20th and the theme was Life into Dimensions, which is a pretty cool theme. Initially I didn't love it, I have to admit, but the more I kept thinking about it, the more ideas I had. So I took some time to brainstorm and noted down some of them that seemed the most interesting to me. Funny enough, one of them sounds exactly like a Mountain Blade clone. Very original. After I was done with this, I was tired and had to take a short break. Yeah, so my break lasted like 7 days. I think I should start working on the game now. First of all, I wanted a clear idea of what I wanted to build. So I started off with coming up with the idea of living in a 2D game and trying to escape to another 3D dimension. Initially, the 2D game was supposed to be a platformer, as you can see here, but I'm kinda sick and tired of those, so I went with the idea of a top-down RPG maker kind of game. So I quickly jumped into Unity and started working on the most basic thing, a player movement script. The code that I wrote allows the player to move only vertically and horizontally on purpose. And if you pause the video, you can snatch it for yourself in case you're working on something similar. Long story short, this is the result. I really liked it, so I moved on to the next part, which is the player sprite and animations. For this purpose, I found this pack on itch made by Rao, and I used specifically this blonde character in the middle. After a few minutes of tweaking, some animator magic and adding a few lines of code, I had this result, and it looks pretty great in my opinion. If you want to get access to the complete Unity project of this game, including all the source code and all the art assets, you can become a $5 Patreon. The link will be in the description. And the last task for day 1 was to find graphical assets for the village where the main player lives. And man, did I luck out by finding this asset, because it contains everything I had in mind for it. So I took the assets to Unity, made a tile palette out of it, and a short while later I had a village where the main action will take place. This is the result for day 1, and I'm really happy with how it looks, but this is just a skeleton at the moment. I had a lot more features to implement and only 48 hours left, so I was definitely feeling a bit anxious at the moment. I started off day 9, or also known as day 2 for me, by placing a bit more details around the village and also placing a couple characters. At this point I already knew that I wanted to have dialogues and quests in the game, and some of these characters and items will be related to that, so everything was coming together and it was looking really good. It was time to move on to the second dimension of the game. Since I went with the idea that the character is constantly feeling like there's another dimension to his world, I wanted to recreate the same village but only in 3D as closely as possible. So I found a 3D asset pack, then used a screenshot of the 2D village as a reference, and here's the result. I have to admit that the 2D version looks a bit better, but I didn't want to start being a perfectionist with 40 hours left, so I moved on to creating a basic first-person controller for this dimension. So first I made a player movement script that relies on the character controller component to move around. Then followed that up with the mouse look component that allows you to look around by using your mouse. And voila, we have a nice looking 3D village and a fully functional first-person controller. Looking back on it, I probably should have placed the camera a bit higher because everything looks freaking gigantic right now in comparison to the player, but hey, we can chalk that up to him being a kid. Now that I have both dimensions figured out, it's time to move on to the dialogue system. My first idea was to use the dialogue system that I made for this series, but there was a problem with it. I needed more control, and I also needed some custom specific events, like for example after a dialogue line finishes I need a character to move or give you a certain quest. I had the option to rewrite or expand the system, but I figured it would take too long, so instead I went with a shortcut and decided to use the animator component instead, which kinda came back to bite me in the ass a bit later. So the idea here is pretty simple. Each level will have a specific cutscene object with one or more animations attached to it. Like in this case, for example, the first animation that you see when you start the game is the camera slowly zooming towards the player. After that, the main character says some things, then his father comes into the picture and gives you your first quest. And if you pay attention to the right side of the screen, you can see that I used animation events in order to call the activate quest function, which is still a placeholder for now. To complete the gameplay loop now, I had to finish the quest system. And for this I created a specific script. The purpose of the script is to track down all the items that you need to collect, and in some cases you also might need a tool to collect these items. For example, in this case you need a scythe to cut down all the grass. And the script also has some references to some UI components, so that you see a tooltip of what you need to do. Inside the code, in the update method, I'm constantly checking if the player has collected all the items, and if he has, we're stopping the player movement and playing a specific cutscene animation. Long story short, after tweaking all the details and finishing up all the code, here's how the first day in the game looks like. So that's how day 2 ended for me. I went to sleep late and only had like 20 hours left to finish the game, which definitely wasn't easy because I had to handcraft all the animations for each cutscene. I was definitely starting to feel the weight of my decision to use the animator instead of a normal dialogue and cutscene system, but hey, in this exact moment I didn't have to think about this was a problem for future me. Ideally, you'd like to have the last day for testing and bug fixing. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for me at all. I had to create most of the content, implement some new features, and then polish it up and create a cohesive experience, so I definitely had no time to waste. So I rushed ahead to create content for the next levels, wrote dialogue, fixed some bugs, and just generally improved the game overall. It was time to choose a name for the game, so I decided to ask our AI overlord ChatGPT for help. After briefly describing what the game is about, it gave me a list of 10 names, but they were actually too long, so I just told it to make them shorter. And this time I was actually impressed by the first result, so I just decided to go with it. My next step after this was to create a main menu. After about 30 minutes I came up with this, and it does look pretty nice, but mostly because of the amazing background music and the pixel art background. So huge shout out to Charlie Watkins for the adventure music pack, and to Stealthfix for the pixel art. The only thing I don't like about this menu is the fact that it's not related to the game at all, but at this point I don't have enough time and I really like how it looks, so I just added a slight animation to make it look a bit more dynamic. And now we're back to the point where the video started. 12 minutes left and I need to create a working build and submit it. So I quickly jumped back into Unity, took a screenshot and made a quick icon for the game. But when I wanted to make a build, guess what happened? I didn't have the WebGL module on this version of Unity. WebGL is not necessary, you can also make a Windows build and submit it, but that's a huge drawback because most people don't want to download your game in order to play it, they just want to play it inside the browser. So I decided there will be no compromise here and just waited for the install to finish. Meanwhile, I can use this time to set up a game page with some description, screenshots and some instructions. And finally, a couple minutes later, the build has finished, so I can take it, upload it and press the best button. When I saw this page and when I saw that the game ran properly, I felt a huge sense of relief knowing that I made it with like 5 minutes left on the clock. There were still some issues here and there, specifically this one, which was caused by the fact that I changed the platform to WebGL, which messed up my lighting. Thankfully, the gamejam allows you to fix bugs even after the deadline, which I'm very thankful for. All in all, it was an amazing experience, I enjoyed it a lot. Now let's see what my results were and what I learned from it. 1 week later, the results kicked in and I was pretty happy with what I saw. I even managed to get number 20 in the theme rating, which placed me on the first page, which is a very cool feeling. Number 49 in music, which is very deserving considering it's a great soundtrack. Number 52 in story, which I appreciate a lot, and it was a surprise because I'm not a writer for sure. We got 126 in aesthetics, which was definitely a bit lower, but if you look at the score, it's 3.85, which was definitely a great score, so no grudges here. Sound got the 234th place, which initially I didn't agree with, but after replaying the game I found some sound effects that were a bit too harsh on the ear and generally didn't sound good. So all in all, I think this was justified. And now to the main problem of the game: fun and mechanics. To be honest, I also felt that the gameplay was a bit boring and tedious at times, because most of the game relies on you reading dialogues and doing fetch quests, which definitely wasn't a good decision on my part because these mechanics are usually the least fun, and it goes to show in the ratings. The rating distribution was really nice, most people were generous and gave it a 5, 4 or a 3-star rating. Now let's see what my overall rank is, and since this gamejam doesn't have this statistic, let's pull up the calculator and just calculate the average rank. As you can see, on average we got 174 out of 996 entries. Pretty good, definitely could have done a lot better if I put in more time and effort, and if I focused more on the gameplay and systems rather than the aesthetics and the story. I think that's the main takeaway from this gamejam. The community was amazing, everyone was very encouraging and was offering some great feedback. The main issue that most players had is the fact that you cannot speed up or skip the dialogue, which is why I said that using the animator system was probably a mistake. In hindsight, I should have built a custom system and added those features, but that's a lesson for future me. I want to thank all of you for watching, and I want to thank gamedevtv for organizing the gamejam. I had a blast and I definitely learned some very important lessons. The cherry on top of it is the fact that every participant who submitted a game got to win a free course of their choice, so keep that in mind for the future in case you want to join. That's it for today, stay safe and keep making games.